Mommy is tied to a rock in the hot sun. Please, help her. The rancher quickly untied the Chinese woman's ropes. The afternoon sun in the Arizona territory did not forgive. Heat pressed down from every side, drawing sweat from the skin and leaving the mouth dry no matter how often one swallowed. The land stretched bare and open, patches of mesquite and brittle brush breaking the emptiness. Dust clung to the horizon like a faint haze as a single rider moved along a faint wagon track. His horse was lean and reliable, head bowed, nostrils flaring with every breath of hot air. The rancher in the saddle was about 38, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face roughened by years outdoors and eyes that carried the weight of too many memories. His jaw was dark with stubble, his hat battered and bent at the edges, and the long coat on his back bore the scars of use, a sleeve frayed where a past fight had torn through. His name was not spoken often anymore. Once he had been a soldier during the war, infantry, then scout, trained to endure heat, hunger, and silence. He had watched friends fall, and he had carried orders he could not forget. When the war ended, he drifted. No family waited for him, no land called him home. He had tried to build a life, a small ranch, but fever had taken his wife and the heart of the place with her. After that, he kept moving, riding trails that led nowhere, sleeping by fires that gave no comfort. His mission now was survival, day to mile. He avoided towns, kept away from law and quarrels, carrying his grief like a companion he could not shake. On this day, he rode without purpose, his mind set on finding water before dusk. That was when a sudden shape broke the stillness ahead. A little girl came running out from the brush, barefoot, her thin frame shaking with exhaustion. She looked no older than 7 or 8, with straight black hair that whipped around her small face. Her simple cotton tunic hung loose and torn, and her chest heaved as if each breath might split her in two. The rancher's horse jolted, and he pulled the reins hard, stopping just in time before trampling the child. The girl raised her arms in panic. Please, her voice cracked from dryness and fear. She bent forward, clutching her side, words spilling out, broken and rushed. My mother, please, you must help. She's tied. The rancher's eyes narrowed. Years of soldiering had taught him to weigh every word, every movement. Could this be a trick? Bandits sometimes use children to lure men into ambushes. But the girl's wide, dark eyes and trembling hands told a story that no outlaw could fake. Her fear was too raw, her voice too desperate. The rancher dismounted, boots landing heavy on the dry ground. He crouched so his shadow fell over the girl, looking her straight in the eye. Where? His voice was rough, worn thin by long disuse. The girl's hand shot out, pointing back toward the scrub and rock behind her. Her arm shook as though she was afraid the stranger would not believe her. This way, they left her. Her lips quivered, and her breath came ragged, as if she had run for miles. For a moment, the rancher stood still, thinking he could turn away. The woman was a stranger, and the trouble that came with townsfolk was not his concern. But the war had left him with one truth: some things could not be ignored. Not if a man wanted to keep the last piece of his soul intact. He gave a short nod and motioned for the girl to lead. They moved quickly across the dry earth, the girl stumbling now and then but never stopping. The rancher followed close, his eyes scanning the horizon for signs of danger. His hand rested near the worn revolver on his belt, instinct sharp. The clearing came into view after a short climb. At its center stood a pale rock, bleached by years of sun. Against it, bound by rope, was a woman. The sight struck the rancher harder than he expected. She was young, mid-20s at most, with skin now reddened by the sun's burn. Her long black hair, once neatly braided, clung to her face, damp with sweat. Ropes bit into her wrists, deep lines carved into her flesh. Her faded blue cotton tunic and trousers were torn at the shoulder and hip, the simple fabric dulled with dust. Her head lolled forward, lips cracked, breath shallow and uneven. She looked half gone already, not from hours of exposure, but from the intentional cruelty of whoever had left her there. The little girl let out a broken cry and rushed forward. Mama! The rancher followed at a steady stride, pulling his knife free. He worked at the ropes quickly, the blade slicing through the rough fibers. The woman's arms fell limp, and she slumped against him before she could hit the ground. He caught her, the heat of her body alarming against his chest, so dry and weak it felt like she might slip away. He lifted her carefully, one arm under her knees, the other steadying her back. She was light, too light for a grown woman. The girl clung to his side as he carried her toward the shade of a mesquite tree on the edge of the clearing. There, he set her down gently, propping her against the trunk. The rancher pulled the canteen from his belt, twisting the cap free. He held it to her lips. At first, she didn't respond, water spilling down her chin. He tilted it back, steady, until her cracked lips parted and she swallowed a few shallow gulps. Her eyelids fluttered open for a moment. Her dark, almond-shaped eyes met his. They were clouded, fevered, but there was a strength behind them, a strength that had not been broken despite the cruelty she'd suffered. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. The rancher reached into his pack, pulling out a rag. He soaked it with water and pressed it gently against her wrists where the skin was raw and broken. She winced but didn't pull away. The girl pressed herself close against her, whispering soft words in a Chinese dialect the rancher couldn't understand, though the tone was clear: comfort, reassurance, love. The rancher worked in silence. He pulled a rough blanket from his horse's saddlebag and laid it over her shoulders. The fabric looked old and torn, but under the shade, it gave her cover from the still-burning sun. As he crouched beside her, he thought about what he had just stepped into. Whoever had tied her there would not welcome a stranger's interference. He knew well enough what it meant to involve himself. Trouble had a way of following kindness out here. Still, as he looked at the girl's trembling hands clutching at her mother's tunic, and at the faint rise and fall of the woman's chest, he knew he would not walk away. His mission had been only to survive each day. Now, without words, that had changed. He had taken them into his care the moment his knife cut the ropes. The rancher adjusted his hat against the glare of the sun and settled onto one knee beside them. He would stay for now, long enough to see if the woman lived, long enough to keep the girl from being left alone in this cruel land. It was a choice made in silence, but in his mind, it was final. The forest was still when dawn broke, but the rancher had not slept. He remained seated with his back against a pine, revolver in hand, his eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the camp. The fire had burned low to ash. The girl and her mother still slept, but every shift in the wind kept him tense. He had lived too long on the edge to ignore the feeling in his gut, the sense that trouble was not far behind. When the girl stirred awake, the rancher motioned her to be quiet and pointed to the dirt a few yards out. Clear hoofprints cut across the soft ground. The girl's breath caught, her face pale. Someone had been near during the night. The rancher rose, studying the tracks. Maybe 5 horses, moving slow. He didn't need to guess who they were. Townsfolk didn't like loose ends, and they sure as hell wouldn't forgive a stranger for cutting a woman free from the punishment they thought she deserved. He walked back to the camp, his expression grim. The woman was awake now, watching him closely. She read the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "They're coming," she asked, her voice low but steady. He gave a short nod. "Not far." Maybe a day behind. The girl pressed herself against her mother, her small hand gripping hers tight. The rancher crouched in front of them. "We can't stay here. We move." As they made ready, the girl asked the question that had lingered unspoken. Why are they so cruel? Why do they want her hurt? Her voice broke, heavy with a weight no child should carry. The rancher tightened the strap on his saddlebag before answering. "Fear. Hate. Sometimes men don't need more reason than that." He glanced at the girl, his gaze hard but honest. "But it doesn't mean we let them finish what they started." They set out north, climbing deeper into pine country, where the ground was rougher and harder to track. The rancher walked ahead, guiding the horse along narrow trails. His mind worked constantly: routes, cover, how many bullets he carried. He had faced worse odds in the war, but this was different. Now he fought to keep 2 strangers alive, and that made the burden heavier. By midday, they reached a high ridge. The rancher scanned the land below. In the distance, faint dust clouds moved across the open ground. Riders, slow but steady, heading north. They were being tracked. He led them down the far side of the ridge, deeper into thicker timber. When they stopped near a stream to rest, the woman turned to him, her voice low. "You could leave us. It would be safer for you." The words struck him harder than he let show. He stared at her, her wrists still raw, her face shadowed by exhaustion, but her eyes fierce with a dignity they had refused to let them steal. "Not my way," he said simply. The girl watched him, studying the man's face, trying to understand why someone with no blood tie would risk so much. The answer showed, not in words, but in every decision he made. Late afternoon storm clouds gathered. The rancher knew rain could be both a curse and a blessing. It slowed travel but also washed away tracks. He urged the horse faster, guiding them toward a cluster of caves he remembered from his scouting years. The first drops fell as they reached the mouth of a shallow cave. He built a small fire near the entrance, just enough for warmth but not enough for the smoke to carry far. As the rain beat down outside, the woman finally asked the question that had been burning since the start. "You said you had a wife. What happened?" The rancher froze. The firelight cast shadows across his face. His voice came low, heavy with memory. "Fever took her. There was nothing to be done. I buried her by the creek where we lived." He stopped there. The weight of it filled the silence. The woman lowered her gaze. She knew grief, though in a different shape. The storm raged on. The rancher sat near the entrance, revolver across his lap. He knew the riders were out there somewhere in the rain, searching. But as he listened to the quiet breathing of the woman and her daughter behind him, he felt the decision harden in his chest. If the riders came, they would not pass without facing him first. The rain slowed by morning. The rancher stepped out first, boots sinking in the softened earth. He crouched low and touched the mud. Fresh tracks. Horses had passed during the night, close, too close. He rose slowly and returned inside. The woman was awake. She studied his face as he came in. "They are near," she said quietly. "Closer than I'd like," he answered. He checked the revolver at his hip, then the rifle strapped to his saddle. Every round mattered now. They broke camp quickly and set out along a narrow deer path that wound uphill. By midday, they reached a ridge that overlooked a stretch of open ground. From there, they saw them, 5 riders moving slowly below, scanning the land. The rancher counted rifles slung across shoulders, pistols at hips, hard faces set in the certainty that no one would challenge them. The girl's breath caught, and she clung tighter to her mother. The rancher motioned them into cover behind the ridge. "Stay quiet. Let them pass," he whispered. For a long hour, they remained hidden. The riders below picked through the mud, circling like wolves. One dismounted, knelt to study the ground, then pointed north. Their voices carried faintly upward. They pushed on. The rancher knew it was only a matter of time. The riders would not give up. They had chosen her death as justice, and his interference had turned it into a challenge to their pride. When the riders finally disappeared, the rancher turned back to the woman and girl. "We can't keep running. They'll follow till we're cornered. We need ground that favors us." The woman frowned. "You mean to fight?" His eyes were steady. "If they force it, yes. I won't let them take you back." Silence stretched heavy. At last, she gave a short nod, her voice quiet but sure. "Then we stand with you." He led them deeper into the forest until they reached a place where boulders jutted up from the ground and a narrow trail cut through. He knew the place from his scouting years. One man with a rifle could hold 5 if he had cover and patience. They settled there as night crept in. The rancher worked quickly, showing the girl how to gather stones to block the narrow trail. The woman prepared what food they had left. When the fire burned low, the woman finally spoke. "You risk your life for us. You don't even know me." He looked at her, his face lined with shadows. I know enough. They left you to die. That's reason enough for me. His words were plain, no gesture to soften them, but she held his gaze longer this time. There was no pity there, only resolve, and she found herself breathing easier because of it. The night passed with little rest. At first light, the forest stirred awake. The rancher was already on his feet, checking the traps and stones they had laid across the narrow trail. The woman woke slowly, her eyes steady. She looked at him preparing the ground and finally asked what had lingered unspoken. If you fall, what becomes of us? He froze a moment before answering, then looked directly at her. That's why I won't fall. His tone was harsh but not cruel, spoken like a vow more than a comfort. By midday, the forest fell quiet in a way that wasn't natural. A faint snap of a twig carried on the breeze. The rancher crouched low, motioning them behind the largest boulder. He whispered to the girl, "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear." The girl nodded, her lips pressed tight. The first rider appeared on the trail, horse stepping cautious. Another followed, then 3 more. One called out, his voice carrying up the pass. "You up there? We know you got her. That woman's a thief. Best hand her back before worse comes of it." The rancher stepped out from behind the rocks, rifle in his hands but lowered. "She's not yours to take." His voice was steady, unshaken. The lead rider sneered. "You don't know what she is. She don't belong here. We gave her judgment and you cut her loose. That makes you part of it." The rancher's jaw tightened. One rider urged his horse forward, pistol drawn. That was the moment the rancher lifted his rifle, the motion smooth and final. "That's far enough," he warned. The standoff stretched, the air thick with the threat of violence. "We'll be back," the lead rider barked. "And when we come, you won't stand a chance with that." He pulled his reins and the others followed, retreating slowly. The rancher didn't lower his rifle until the sound of hooves faded. He turned back to the woman and girl. He reloaded his rifle with slow, deliberate hands. "They'll come again," he said, his voice low, heavy with certainty. "And next time, it won't end with words." The fire that night was small, the mood heavy. But under the fear lay a shift. The woman no longer looked at him as a stranger. The girl no longer saw him as just a passing protector. And the rancher, though he would not admit it, no longer thought of them as a burden. They were bound together now. And if the riders came back, it would be as a family that they faced them. The next day, the sound came. Hooves, steady and certain. The rancher moved quickly, pushing the woman and girl behind the stone wall they had built. He took position a few yards ahead, rifle resting on the ridge of a boulder. His heartbeat slowed, his body settling into the calm he had known before battle. 5 riders appeared. "Last chance, stranger," the leader's voice carried. "Hand her over and we'll let you walk away." The rancher's voice cut back, sharp as steel. "She's not yours to take." The leader sneered. "She's a thief. She's nothing." The rancher's jaw tightened, his voice colder now. "She's a mother. That's worth more than any of you will ever be." The first shot cracked, echoing through the trees. The rancher fired back, his rifle kicking against his shoulder. One rider toppled from his horse. The others fanned out, returning fire, bullets shattering bark and stone. The woman pulled her daughter down, covering her with her body. The fight was quick, brutal. The rancher dropped another rider, then shifted to his revolver when the rifle emptied. He moved with the precision of a man who had lived this before. A bullet grazed his arm, tearing cloth and flesh. He gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. One rider broke through, charging closer. The woman, without thinking, grabbed a heavy stone and hurled it with all her strength. It struck the man's head, throwing him off balance just enough for the rancher's shot to finish what she started. He glanced back at her briefly, their eyes meeting with something fierce and unspoken. When the gunfire ceased, the silence returned, heavy and final. 3 men lay still. 2 had fled, wounded, into the trees. The rancher stood breathing hard, his arm bleeding. He lowered his empty revolver slowly. The girl crawled out from behind the stones, rushing to him. "You're hurt," she cried. The rancher knelt, resting a hand on her shoulder. "It's nothing I can't carry." The woman came forward, tearing cloth from her own tunic to bind his wound. Her hands were firm, steady despite the blood. She didn't look away from him, and he didn't look away from her. In that moment, no words were needed. He had chosen them, and she had chosen to stand with him. The battle was over, but the air still carried the smell of gunpowder. The rancher sat close to the fire, his arm bandaged. The girl lay asleep between them, her head resting against her mother's lap. The woman finally broke the silence, her voice low. "Will they come again?" The rancher looked into the fire. "No. Not after this. The ones that lived will ride home and tell the others what happened. They'll have no stomach to chase us further." He spoke with the certainty of a man who knew the ways of pride and defeat. She searched his face, and slowly, her shoulders eased. For the first time since she had been left in the sun to die, she believed the danger might truly be behind them. The next day, they moved on, leaving the battleground behind. The rancher led them north until the trees thinned and a small valley opened before them. In its center stood an abandoned cabin, weathered but still sound. He stopped at the sight of it. "Knew this place," he said. "Scout station long ago. No one's claimed it since." "Can it be ours?" the girl asked eagerly. The rancher hesitated only a moment before nodding. "If we're willing to work for it." The days that followed were filled with labor, but it was labor that brought life instead of death. The rancher cut new boards for the door and patched the roof. The girl gathered stones for the hearth and fetched water. The woman cleaned the cabin, scrubbing the dirt from the floor, and sang softly to her daughter at night. For the first time in years, the rancher found himself laughing quietly at the girl's clumsy attempts to chop kindling. He caught himself, surprised at the sound. The woman noticed and smiled faintly. One evening, as the fire in the cabin burned steady, the woman sat across from the rancher. "You could still leave," she said. Her words were not an accusation, but a test. He met her gaze without flinching. "I could. But I won't." He looked at her, at the pride no cruelty had broken, the quiet strength that had carried her through everything. "I was done living for myself alone the day I cut you free." Her breath caught slightly. She reached across the table, laying her hand lightly over his. His hand, rough and scarred, turned and held hers in return. No words followed. None were needed. When the night deepened, the rancher stepped outside, the woman beside him. The valley stretched quiet under a sky thick with stars. The girl slept safe in the cabin behind them. The air was cool, the only sound the whisper of the wind through the pines. The rancher looked out across the land, then down at the woman standing close at his side. "This is home now," he said simply. She nodded, her hand brushing his as if to seal the choice. For the first time in years, she was not afraid of tomorrow. And for the first time since burying his wife, he no longer imagined riding off alone into the horizon. They stood there together in silence, two people who had been broken by cruelty and loss, now bound not by blood, but by choice. A woman who had been left to die, a girl who had begged for help, and a man who thought he had nothing left to give. Together, in the quiet valley, they had carved something stronger than survival. They had found what they had been missing, a place to stay, a family to stay for. The story ended not with escape, but with the one thing the rancher had never let himself hope for again, the decision to remain. And this time, he stayed.